Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something really fascinating. We're going to impartially explore a philosophical framework that comes from the teachings and writings of the Guy Shifeng. He's the founder of Life Chain Yuan. Specifically, we'll be unpacking a text of his called The Soul Aspects of the Beauty of Life Chain Yuan's Community Life. And we're going to look at one really bold, kind of mind-bending concept today. It's the idea that the mental state of individuals is actually the absolute deciding factor in whether a community experiences total harmony or complete destruction. So let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Just think for a second about the conflicts you see in the news every single day. Why do we fight? What is genuinely causing these massive global crises? You know, when things go sideways, it's so incredibly easy for us to point the finger at politics or the economy or a lack of resources, right? But what if a petty, everyday argument with your neighbor and a massive global catastrophe actually shared the exact same root cause? Well, according to the teachings of Shufeng, the answer to our problems doesn't actually lie out there in the material world at all. It's somewhere much, much closer to home.
And that brings us perfectly to this incredibly profound quote. The root of all crises lies in the crisis of the soul. This right here is the absolute foundational thesis of Life Chain Yuan philosophy. Shufeng argues that before we even try to look outward at complex global systems or economies or political structures, we have to look strictly inward, directly at the mind. His point is that if the mental state of a group's members is flawed, then trying to establish a perfect living system, and it doesn't matter if that's a family, a business, or an entire nation, is basically impossible. Now, to explain this, Shufeng uses this incredibly vivid metaphor. He calls it the soul garden. I want you to literally imagine your mind as a plot of land. On one side, you have what he calls a weedy soul. This is a garden completely overgrown with toxic, invasive plants, things like selfishness, jealousy, hatred, and just really strong, unchecked egos. A community made up of people with these neglected gardens, it's completely destined for constant contradictions and endless disputes. But then contrast that with the other side, the cultivated soul. This represents a relatively perfect, peaceful, and harmonious state of mind. And according to the text, this diligent, continuous internal cultivation is the absolute top priority for Chanyan Celestials. And Shufeng actually scales this metaphor up in a way that's kind of mind-blowing. It's a striking progression. Step 1, two individuals argue. Why? Because there are just too many weeds in their soul gardens. Step 2, two races conflict. Again, the text traces this directly back to problems in the collective minds of the people involved. Step 3, whole countries go to war. Same root cause. But here is where the philosophy gets incredibly expansive. Step 4, the text asserts that even when we witness frequent natural disasters, we're talking floods, droughts, massive hurricanes, wildfires, it is fundamentally because there is a severe problem with the collective minds of all of humanity. The internal state literally creates the external reality. So you might be thinking, well, what if we just fix the material world? But the crucial point here is that material solutions alone simply are not enough. You could have literal mountains of gold and silver. You could have an army of 1 million people, or the most advanced cutting-edge technology on the planet. Shufeng actually writes that even if you had supernatural powers, it wouldn't save you. Because if you neglect the construction of that internal soul garden, the inevitable result of all that external wealth is just corruption and collapse, period. Without what he calls spiritual energy, no society survives, and no individual can lead a truly peaceful life. So how do we fix it? If we have to be the gardeners of our own minds, what kind of fertilizer are we supposed to use? According to Life Chain Yuan teachings, building a healthy soul garden takes more than just good intentions. It requires a continuous infusion of powerful spiritual energy. And Shufeng lays out 3 very specific sources to get it. Let's look at the nutrients for the garden, specifically 3 sources of spiritual energy. Ah, for the tower. This starts at the absolute macro level of universal creation. The text explains that the most powerful source of spiritual energy you can possibly absorb comes from having awe and belief in the greatest creator. It's about developing a deep, sincere understanding of the fairness of the Tao, the fundamental way of the universe. Now, why does this actually matter for your Tuesday morning commute or your daily life? Because this awe establishes what Shufeng calls an internal judgment platform. It's essentially an unshakable, supreme moral compass, built right into your mind. The text argues that without this profound understanding of universal fairness, people are so easily led astray by their base desires. They inevitably cave to the temptations of money and power, and suddenly deception and theft just become the societal norm. But with this internal judgment platform actively operating, a person simply stops acting recklessly. They aren't enticed by wickedness, because every single thought and action is constantly being weighed on this internal scale of ultimate fairness. Then we have source 2, the wisdom of the sages. This second source is presented in the text as the necessary cure for a very specific, very common human ailment. Schwefeng points out how strange it is that humans, these relatively insignificant creatures in the grand scheme of the cosmos, can develop such ambitious and arrogant aspirations. This dangerous arrogance, he explains, is quite simply the result of ignorance. To cure that ignorance, Life Chaniwan philosophy draws on an incredibly eclectic mix of historical and spiritual figures. We're talking about guiding lights like Jesus Christ, Buddha Sakyamuni, Celestial Laozi, and the deiform Buddha. By actively listening to the teachings of these gods, Buddhas, immortals, and sages, an individual gains incredible clarity of mind. It allows you to definitively distinguish right from wrong, find your own spiritual coordinates, and actually learn how to conduct yourself in what is obviously a very complex world.
And finally, source 3, the law of causality.
So we've looked at universal awe and historical wisdom. This third and final source of spiritual energy focuses tightly on the personal, everyday mechanics of cause and effect. And the absolute core of this law comes down to one single incredibly powerful number, 0. According to Schwefeng, to cultivate your soul garden, you have to deeply understand that the sum of all positive and negative energy in the entire universe ultimately equals 0. It is a state of absolute, unbreakable, perfect balance, no exceptions. In your day-to-day life, this zero-sum universal balance translates to a very simple, profoundly practical truth. Effort equals gain. When you truly grasp what causes what, a massive paradigm shift happens in your mind. You completely stop obsessing over petty, temporary gains and losses. You drop the arrogance, and you completely distance yourself from falsehood, hatred, and deceit. Because what's the point? Instead, you dedicate your life entirely to truth, goodness, beauty, faith, and diligence. You do this trusting completely that the universe's mechanics will perfectly balance the scales in the end. And when you put all of this together, when a person successfully absorbs these 3 sources of spiritual energy and meticulously weeds and cultivates their soul garden, you get what we could call the harvest of a Chanyuan celestial. Just look at what their life becomes. They achieve lasting inner peace. They live a life with 0 regrets and absolutely no resentment. They follow a natural flow, basically taking things exactly as they come and acting in total accordance with their intrinsic nature. And finally, they face the future with absolute, unshakable confidence because they have completely entrusted their life and their future to the management of the Tao. Which leaves us with one final, really important question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. What weeds are currently growing in your own soul garden? If Zufeng's philosophy holds true, then the peace we so desperately want to see out there in the world, in our countries and in our homes, depends entirely on the daily, diligent gardening we do inside our own minds. Are you purposefully cultivating peace and absorbing spiritual energy, or are you just passively letting the weeds of ego and jealousy take over the plot? It is a truly fascinating framework to reflect on. Thank you so much for learning with us today on The Explainer, and we will catch you next time.